Welcome everyone to the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime webinar for Purpose Area 6, Children's Justice Act Partnerships for Indian Communities. My name is Christina and I will be your moderator for today. It is my pleasure to turn things over to our subject matter expert from the Office of Victims of Crime. Your presenter today will be Yolanda Curtis Gibson.
Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us. As mentioned previously, this is the U.S. Department of Justice's webinar for the fiscal year 2019 Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation, Purpose Area 6, Children's Justice Act Partnerships for Indian Communities program. Throughout this presentation, you'll often hear me refer to the solicitation as CTAS and this Purpose Area 6 as CJA for short. Again, my name is Yolanda Curtis Gibson, and I'm a Victim Justice Program Specialist within the Federal, International, and Tribal Division at the Office for Victims of Crime, which I'll refer to as OVC for short. Over the course of this webinar, I will provide an overview of OVC and the CTAS solicitation, a description of Purpose Area 6, and an overview of application requirements and how to apply for funding under this purpose area. I will also provide some key tips for creating a great application. In this first section, I'll provide an overview of OVC and our role in assisting victims within tribal communities. OVC is charged by Congress with administering the Crime Victims Fund, which is a major source of funding for victim services throughout the nation. Through the Crime Victims Fund, OVC supports victims in tribal communities, state victim compensation and assistance programs, training, technical assistance, and information resources, victims of international terrorism and mass violence, both here at home in the U.S. and abroad, victims of human trafficking, and national scope demonstration and service projects. As mentioned previously, OVC supports victims in tribal communities through a number of programs. Some of those programs include the Developing Future Victim Specialists for Indian Country program, a Tribal Mapping Resource Project, training and technical assistance for tribal grantees, the Tribal Community Wellness Center, and two purpose areas through the Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation. Those are Purpose Areas 6 and 7. I should also note that our American Indian Alaska Native Training and Technical Assistance Program providers are Fox Valley Technical College and Unified Solutions. If you are awarded OVC funding under CTAS this year, one of these organizations will be your designated training and technical assistance provider. For more information about OVC's other grant opportunities, please visit the OVC website at ovc.gov. In 2010, the Department of Justice launched its Coordinated Tribal Assistance Solicitation, or CTAS. This was in direct response to concerns raised by tribal leaders regarding the department's grant process and how it did not provide the flexibility tribes needed to address criminal justice and public safety needs in their communities. Through CTAS, federally recognized tribes and tribal consortia are able to submit a single application for most of the Justice Department's tribal grant programs. The department designed this comprehensive approach to save time and resources and to allow tribes and the department to gain a better understanding of tribes' overall public safety. CTAS is not a program, but is an overarching structure under which tribes can apply for up to 10 separate grant programs through one single application. Again, CTAS is made up of 10 different purpose areas, which are listed on your screen. Applicants may apply for funding under the purpose areas that best meet their tribe's concerns related to public safety, criminal and juvenile justice, and the needs of victims or survivors of domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, and other crimes. Applicants may apply under as many purpose areas as needed to address the concerns within their community. There are three purpose areas that solely focus on serving victims of crime. The first is Purpose Area 5, which is funded by the Office on Violence Against Women, or OVW, and is a separate office from OVC. As noted on your screen, OVW focuses on improving the criminal justice system response to violence against women. The other two purpose areas that focus on serving crime victims are the two OVC-funded purpose areas, Purpose Area 6, about which today's presentation will focus, and Purpose Area 7, and that webinar took place this past Tuesday. As mentioned previously, today's presentation will provide more in-depth information on Purpose Area number 6. OVC expects to make approximately 6 awards of $450,000 each under this purpose area. Each award will be for a 3-year period starting October 1st, 2019 and ending September 30th, 2022. So as I mentioned earlier, CTAS has 10 different purpose areas. Each of those purpose areas may have different eligibility requirements. However, under Purpose Area 6, the following applicants are eligible to apply. They are federally recognized tribes as determined by the Secretary of the Interior, Alaska Native villages and corporations, tribal consortia consisting of 2 or more federally recognized tribes, and tribal designees, provided that if you are a tribal designee, you submit a current tribal resolution or another legal enactment from the tribe as part of your application. Now, this is important to note. Applicants who received Purpose Area 6 funding in fiscal year 2017 or fiscal year 2018 are not eligible to apply for fiscal year 2019 Purpose Area 6 program funding. So now we'll talk a little bit more about the Purpose Area 6 goals and objectives. By providing funding through the CJA program since 1989, OVC has worked with tribal communities to enhance their capacity to address the needs of child abuse victims. Through this program, tribes have an opportunity to intervene in the cycle of abuse and trauma that keeps so many Native children from thriving. Ultimately, the goal of the CJA Purpose Area 6 program is to provide funding, technical assistance, and training to help American Indian and Alaska Native communities develop, establish, and operate programs designed to improve the investigation, prosecution, and handling of cases of criminal child abuse and neglect. This purpose area places a special emphasis on child sexual abuse cases and handling them in a manner which lessens trauma for child victims, supports comprehensive and coordinated multidisciplinary responses to child abuse victims, and provides trauma-informed services to these victims and their non-offending family members. So on this screen, you'll see some allowable activities that can be funded under CJA. Some of these activities include staffing and fringe benefits costs. These can be for dedicated prosecutors, specialized law enforcement investigators, child protection services personnel, forensic interviewers, case managers, clinical mental health professionals, pediatric sexual assault nurse examiners or SANE nurses, and other allied professionals. All personnel must be clearly linked to victim assistance program activities and justified in your purpose area narrative. In addition to supporting personnel, funding may be used to provide victim assistance services that are linked to the child's victimization, as well as services for their non-abusing family members. So victim assistance may include, but is certainly not limited to, developmentally appropriate trauma-informed counseling for individual victims, counseling for secondary victims such as siblings or grandparents, family therapy, group therapy, case management services, aid with participating in traditional healing ceremonies or other cultural activities, assistance with food, clothing, and transportation costs, emergency shelter services, assistance with crime victim compensation claims, and medical and dental care. I will note that costs solely associated with prevention activities are not allowable, but we do allow for funding to be used for outreach and awareness, and that can include the creation of public service announcements, posters, brochures, fact sheets, the development and distribution of written response protocols, policies, and standard operating procedure manuals that promote trauma-informed approaches. So we'll continue highlighting some allowable activities that can be funded under CJA. These include cultural and traditional practices. We encourage you to incorporate cultural and traditional practices in your proposed activities. And these, for example, can include smudging, sweat lodges, or other traditional healing ceremonies for victims of child abuse and neglect and their non-abusing family members. You can pay for general office supplies for your program to operate. Those are things like pens, pencils, toner, ink, etc. You can use funding to enhance your existing equipment and technology or to purchase new equipment and technology for this program. And that might include supplies for play therapy, forensic interview recording equipment, digital cameras, race kits, medical equipment for a pediatric SANE program, sexual assault nurse examiner program, office furniture and equipment such as printers and scanners or child-friendly furnishings, materials for traditional crafts, and you can also purchase a vehicle for your program staff to provide transportation for client services that are directly connected to your client's victimization. You can also use funding to pay for travel and training. Please note that funding can be used to send grant-funded staff to trainings or conferences that are relevant to the handling, investigation, and prosecution of child abuse and neglect cases. Your budget must include funds to attend at least 3 OVC-related trainings, 1 for each year of the grant. And those are the Indian Nations Conference, the New Grantee Orientation, which is usually held in conjunction with the Indian Nations Conference. So there'll be, for year 1, you should budget for a New Grantee Orientation and Indian Nations Conference combined, usually held in the same location, your OVC regional training, and then another Indian Nations Conference, as the Indian Nations Conference is held every other year. Please note that this is just an overview and that additional information about what can be funded under this award is listed in the solicitation starting on page 28. On this screen, you'll see some activities that Purpose Area 6 funding cannot be used for. They cannot be used to pay for costs associated with services for criminal offenders, services that focus solely on crime prevention activities, so activities before abuse occurs, or on construction. On this screen, you'll see some examples of projects that can be funded under CJA and have been funded under CJA, and they include a CASA program, so court-appointed special advocate, child forensic interviewer, pediatric SANE nurses, special crimes against children, investigators or prosecutors, and child advocacy centers. If your proposal does not include prosecution or investigation activities, we strongly encourage you to apply for funding under Purpose Area 7, as Purpose Area 7 can be used to provide services to victims of all ages, including children, as long as it does not include prosecution or investigation activities. So if you are awarded, you'll be required to submit 4 deliverables to OVC within the first 18 months of the award. Those are the community needs assessment, the privacy certificate, strategic plan, and logic model. The community needs assessment is used to identify gaps and other issues in your community's current response to incidents of child abuse and neglect. The privacy certificate describes how you will protect the privacy of individuals who participate in your community need assessment activities and the confidentiality of the data that is collected as a result of the assessment activities. The strategic plan establishes long-term priorities, directs resources towards achieving specific goals, and strengthens your programming for victims of child abuse and neglect. And finally, the logic model is used to aid in evaluating the effectiveness of program planning activities as you work to implement your strategic plan. As many of you already know, if you receive grant funding under this program, you'll be required to report on your grant activities. You will be required to submit performance measures data on a quarterly basis. You're required to submit certain sections within the performance measurement tool. Those are Section 6, related to strategic planning, and Section 7 on victim services. If you receive funding, please know that you will receive training on how to use the PMT. In addition to the quarterly performance measures data reporting, you will also be required to submit semi-annual progress reports and quarterly financial status reports. Upon award, OVC will assign you to one of 2 technical assistance providers. They are Unified Solutions, Tribal Community Development Group, and Technical College. On this screen, you'll see some examples of services that they provide, including assistance with completing the grant deliverables that I mentioned, offering training opportunities that are customized to your program or your community's needs, and assisting with community engagement, among other things. When you are developing your budget, remember that the TTA providers can often provide services free of charge. I encourage you to think about this, as some funding that you may have initially thought about allocating for outside training might be put to another use. So now I'm going to tell you a little more about the application requirements for this program. The solicitation opened on November 27, 2018. You can find the solicitation using the link on your screen, justice.gov/tribal/open solicitations. And please note that the deadline for applying is February 26, 2019 at 9:00 p.m. Eastern Time. There are 3 documents that absolutely must be included in your application in order for your application to move forward for consideration. Those are your tribal community and justice profile, which is where 30% of your application score, the purpose area narrative for each individual purpose area for which you are applying, and that's worth 55% of your score, and the budget detail worksheet and narrative, which is worth 15% of your score. If you do not submit any of these 3 documents, your application will not be considered for funding. If you'd like more information about the requirements for these 3 documents, please review Section D of this year's CTAS solicitation. So the tribal community and justice profile, which I mentioned is 30% of your score, is rated based on how well you respond to each of the 5 questions and how the responses demonstrate your need for funding. It's designed to enable you to describe your community's strengths, resources, challenges, and needs. If you need more information about the requirements related to this particular document, you can access the CTAS application resource guide. Please note that when you are completing the tribal community and justice profile, you can enter as much or as little text as you need to fully describe your community, as long as the total number of pages for the entire tribal narrative profile does not exceed 10 pages. Remember that the individuals reviewing the application may not be familiar with your community, so description should be as clear and detailed as possible. Be sure that every question is answered thoroughly, and if there are questions that you are unable to answer, please provide an explanation about why that information is unavailable. If you happen to be looking on the DOJ Tribal Justice site for the template, please note that the name of the file is the Sample Tribal Narrative Profile Template. That is the same as the Tribal Community and Justice Profile. So next we'll talk about the program narrative, which is worth 55% of your application score. This also has a 10-page limit, and that 10-page limit includes the template text. Your answers should be double-spaced. This document must provide information about your tribe's victim service needs, and a description of your proposed project. Please note that you must provide a complete response to each question and enough information so that reviewers understand your tribe's victim service needs and how you propose to use OVC funding to meet those needs. If the program narrative fails to comply with these requirements, OVC may consider such noncompliance in our award decisions. If any of the sections in the template are not applicable to your request, please note not applicable. Please also note that you are not required to use the narrative. However, you must address all the questions within the narrative. And to download the narrative template, please visit the link on your screen. The program narrative template includes some questions that you'll need to answer that are focused on program design and implementation. This starts somewhere around questions number 4 and 5 of the template. Your responses to these questions should include goals, objectives, and activities that are aligned with serving child victims of crime. As you're writing this, please be sure to be brief, concise, and clear. Make sure that the information you provide is consistent throughout your proposal. Make sure to create solid goals and measurable objectives, and your objectives should be SMART. That is, they should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And also focus on setting a realistic timeline to complete your project. So now we'll move on to talk about the budget detail worksheet, which is worth 15% of your application score. DOJ has developed a budget detail workbook that includes the demographic forms, the budget detail worksheet, and the budget narrative into one single document. The workbook is user-friendly and has been designed to calculate your total. Therefore, we strongly encourage you to use the workbook when completing your proposed budget. The fillable versions of the budget detail worksheet, budget narrative, and demographic forms can be downloaded from GMS or the link on your screen, grants.ojp.usdoj.gov/CTAS. Only one workbook is required to be completed per application. The demographic form collects important demographic information that pertains to Purpose Area 1, and only applicants applying for Purpose Area 1 should complete the demographic form. So if you are applying for Purpose Area 6, but you are not also applying for Purpose Area 1, you do not need to complete the demographic form. However, your application must include both the budget detail worksheet and budget narrative, again, for each purpose area for which funds are being requested. If the budget detail worksheet and budget narrative are not submitted for a purpose area, your application will not be considered for funding in that purpose area. Make sure that in your budget you include costs for 2 appropriate staff to attend at least 3 required OBC trainings, which I mentioned before, the grantee orientation, the OBC mandatory training, it's OBC mandatory training to be announced, and a National Indian Nations Conference. Also, be sure that you properly link all costs outlined in the budget detail worksheet to your program narrative. If you are interested in learning more about completing the budget detail worksheet, please note that there is a webinar on this topic, and it is currently scheduled for Thursday, January 31st at 2:00 p.m. Eastern Time. On this slide, you'll find some tips that can help you as you complete your budget. Make sure that you provide calculations and total costs for each expense. Make sure that you clearly link your expenses in your budget to your proposal. Ensure that you do not exceed the maximum amount of $450,000. And make sure that you are only budgeting for a 3-year project. All awards are only for 3 years, and unfortunately, extensions are not allowed. All of your costs must be reasonable, allowable, consistent, and allocable. And if you're still not sure whether or not a cost is allowable, I recommend that you take a look at the DOJ financial guide and also at the list of allowable and unallowable activities in the fiscal year 2019 CTAS solicitation. So here are a few reminders you should keep in mind when drafting your key document. Make sure that you use simple and concise language. Make sure that your information is presentable and organized. Be realistic about how you will achieve your goals. Make sure that you get feedback from those who may run the project. We understand that oftentimes a separate grant writer that may write your grant applications, and they are not the people that will actually be working on the program if you're funded. It's important that to the extent possible, the people writing the application work with the people that are actually implementing the program to ensure that your project will be successful. And make sure that the proposal is consistent with the Purpose Area 6 goals and objectives. Here's some more reminders. Make sure that you put yourself in the reviewer's shoes. Ask yourself these questions. Did you properly convey the need for funding? Is your application cohesive? Did you use spelling and grammar check? Make sure that you consider your audience and review criteria. And if there are acronyms used that maybe are only familiar to people in your organization, that you be sure to spell them out the first time you use them. So on this slide, you'll see a list of documents that are highlighted in the solicitation and that should be included. So earlier I talked about the 3 required documents. These documents should be included, and those documents are your project abstract, your tribal authority to apply or tribal resolution, disclosure of high-risk status, disclosure of pending or active applications, disclosure of lobbying activities, and a direct cost rate agreement if you are requesting that in your grant application, your financial management and system of internal control questionnaire, and other attachments as needed, such as resumes for key personnel, or if you've been funded under OBC before, an approved strategic plan or logic model. So even though your application can move forward for review without you submitting these documents, I highly recommend that you submit everything that you can up front because you'll have to submit many of them anyway. If you don't submit some of these documents up front, such as the tribal resolution or your disclosure of pending applications, we will ask for them later and place a withholding special condition on your award until we receive them. So please submit as many documents as you can up front so we can avoid any delays later on. In a separate document, you should include a high-quality project abstract that summarizes your proposed project in 400 words or less. Your abstract should be written for a general public audience, submitted as a separate attachment with project abstract as part of the file name, and note that this will not count against the page limit for the program narrative. Your abstract should also be single-spaced using a standard 12-point font such as Times New Roman with 1-inch margins. Your abstract should include a brief description of your project's purpose, the population to be served, and the activities that you'll implement to achieve your project's goals and objectives. It should be specific to the project proposed for this purpose area, and you can find the templates when you visit the link to the site noted on your screen. You are required to disclose whether or not you are currently designated as high risk by any federal grant-making agency in order to allow for proper federal oversight of your CTAS award. This disclosure should include information about any status requiring additional oversight by a federal agency due to past programmatic or financial concerns. If you are designated as high risk by a federal grant-making agency, then you must include the following information in your application: the name of the federal agency that designated your organization as high risk, the date that that federal agency designated your organization as high risk, the name, phone number, and email address of your point of contact at the federal agency that designated your organization as high risk, and the reasons for the high risk designation as set out by the federal awarding agency. There are 3 commonly asked questions that we get related to this, so I'd like to go through those. The first question is, how do I find out if my agency is currently designated high risk? The answer to that is there is no central database that you can reference to determine your high risk status. You are required to self-report that information. The second question is there a form that you can fill out? Unfortunately, applicants are required to submit a letter or statement that outlines your designated status. There is not a form that you can fill out. And the final question is, if my agency is not labeled as high risk, do I still need to submit a disclosure? The answer to that is yes. You are still required to submit a letter or a statement that simply states that you're not designated as high risk. If you fail to provide a disclosure with your application, a withholding special condition will be placed on your award until we receive a response. As part of your fiscal year 2019 CTAS solicitation, you should submit an applicant disclosure of pending and active awards. This disclosure or written statement should include both direct applications for federal funding, or as applications to federal agencies, and indirect applications for funding, such as applications to state agencies that subgrant federal awards. This written statement should include the federal or state funding agency name, the solicitation name, purpose area, and project name, and the point of contact information of the applicable funding agency. Access to your funds may be withheld if this form is not submitted with your application. This only applies to applications submitted within the last 12 months that are still pending or for active awards that are ongoing. You'll also be required to submit a disclosure of lobbying activities form. That's Form SFLLL. To download that form, you can access it through the link on your screen, ojp.gov/funding/apply/resources/disclosure.pdf. And like some of the other forms I mentioned, access to your funds may be withheld if this form is not submitted with your application. As part of your fiscal year 2019 application, you will need to submit a financial management systems and internal controls questionnaire. The questionnaire helps OJP evaluate the adequacy of your financial system. It should only be completed by financial staff most familiar with your organization's systems, policies, and procedures, such as your chief financial officer or an equivalent, in order to ensure that the correct responses are recorded and submitted to OJP. You can download the form from the OJP website, and the link to that is on your screen. In this section, we'll cover how to apply for Purpose Area 6 funding. So here's the application timeline. It has some information that I've already covered. Again, the solicitation opens November 27th, 2018. It'll close on Tuesday, February 26th, 2019 at 9:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. DOJ expects to award grants no later than September 30th, 2019. All project dates will be on or after October 1st, 2019. And please note that you cannot begin work on your project until your budget has been reviewed and approved by OJP. Additional information and/or restrictions will be provided in your award package. So here are some steps to make sure that you follow when you apply, particularly if you are a brand new applicant. Make sure that you acquire a DUNS number, and DUNS stands for Data Universal Numbering System. Make sure that you acquire or renew your registration with the System for Award Management, or SAM, database well in advance of applying. Make sure that you have an active GMS username and password. Verify your SAM registration in GMS. Search for the funding opportunity in GMS. Register by selecting the Apply Online button associated with the solicitation title, and then submit your application. For more information, you can review Section H of the fiscal year 2019 CTAS solicitation. So this slide just shows you what the screen will look like when you go to apply in GMS. So that'll give you an idea of what to expect when you log in. If you experience any issues with GMS, please contact the help desk at the phone number or email address noted on the screen. As part of your application, you'll be required to complete the standard Form 424 online in GMS. And I'd like to offer a few quick tips for completing this form. Make sure that the amount of federal funding requested on the SF 424 matches the total amount of federal funding requested in your preliminary budget. Make sure that the individual identified as the authorized representative on the form is someone who has the authority to accept a federal award and all of its obligations on behalf of your tribe or organization. If you're a first-time applicant, make sure that you attach any official legal documents to your application. So those would be things like articles of incorporation, 501c3 status documentation, or organizational letterhead in order to confirm your legal name, address, and employee identification number that you've entered on the SF 424. And just as a reminder for current OJP grantees that are interested in applying again, if your tribe or organization has had a change in its legal name or mailing address since you last received an award, please submit a Grant Adjustment Notice, or GAN, to update that information as soon as possible so that OJP is aware of these changes. So here are some additional tips to consider as you're completing and checking your SF 424. Make sure next to type of submission that you enter application non-construction. That even if you are applying for to refund a program that's already been funded under CTAS before, it's still new. So make sure that if you're applying for FY 2019 funding, that next to type of application you select new. For the descriptive title of applicant's project, you can name it whatever really you want to name it, but we recommend that you use OVC FY 2019 CJA program. The start date is October 1st, 2019, and end date is September 30th, 2022. The estimated funding amount is the same amount that you requested in your budget detail worksheet. And again, the authorized representative should be someone with the authority to accept a federal award. So in this last section, I will cover some tips and resources that might be useful for you. I recommend that you visit DOJ's dedicated CTAS website for information. That's www.justice.gov/tribal. We have several webinars scheduled during the open period of the solicitation. Those webinars are supposed to be uploaded to the Tribal Justice website. However, with the impending shutdown, there may be a delay in getting those posted. And you can also find fact sheets and frequently asked questions for the purpose areas on this website as well. There is an online guide available also on the Tribal Justice website. Link is below at the bottom of your screen. The guide contains strategies that can help you read and comprehend the CTAS solicitation, which we understand is lengthy and can be quite complex. It can help you coordinate or figure out strategies so that you can coordinate a grant writing team. It can help you identify and articulate the needs of your community and help you generate and capture ideas and solutions for your community. This guide can also help you figure out ways to organize key community players so that you can successfully execute your proposed program. So this is the FY 2019 CTAS webinar schedule. We've had several so far. There are 3 that are supposed to be scheduled after this webinar, including the budget detail worksheet completion webinar that I mentioned earlier. You just want to make sure that you upload all of your relevant documents in GMS. This is a checklist of all of the documents. We've discussed all of them already, so I won't cover them again here. But also note that there's a checklist in the CTAS solicitation that has all of these documents listed. Here's a list of important websites, including the website for OVC, the DOJ financial guide that I mentioned earlier, GMS, the link where you can download key CTAS documents and templates, the DOJ Tribal Justice website, and the OJP Grants Resource Guide. For the OVC website, as well as the DOJ Tribal Justice site and OJP Grants Resource Guide, I recommend that if you haven't already, that you go to those sites and sign up for email updates. So here's some contact information if you need technical assistance with submitting your application in GMS. There's the phone number and the email address for the GMS help desk. And if you need any programmatic or general assistance related to the solicitation requirements, you can contact the DOJ Response Center, and that phone number and email address are also on the screen. So that concludes my presentation. I will now open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Yolanda. We do have a few questions. Can you begin delivery of services during the 18-month period, or must the plan be approved before you can begin to offer services?
All that matters is that your budget is approved. You can offer services before the strategic plan is actually completed.
Great, thank you. Does the tribal resolution demonstrating authority to apply need to be specific to each purpose area that we are applying for, or can it be generalized to CTAS 2019?
It can be generalized to CTAS 2019.
Thank you. Is the SF424 specific to each purpose area, or can one SF424 suffice for all purpose areas being applied for?
It has to be specific to each purpose area. You have a separate budget for each purpose area, so the SF424 will have a dollar amount that only corresponds to one purpose area.
Great, thank you. Is the deadline date going to be extended if the government shutdown continues?
At this time, the CTAS deadline will remain the same. If OJP is not operational during the government shutdown and GMS is closed, because that is a possibility, there hasn't been a determination yet about whether or not the deadline will be extended. However, if that happens and you can't get through to GMS, we are working with our leadership to make a decision, and we are pushing to have that deadline extended, but ultimately that decision has to be made by higher ups. So in a nutshell, as of right now, the deadline will not be extended. However, if we do shut down after 5 o'clock tomorrow and GMS also shuts down, then we are having discussions about the deadline being extended. But please plan to the extent possible to still submit your application by the deadline.
Thank you. Can you please go over how we should fill out the disclosure of lobbying form when we don't do lobbying?
Okay, you still fill out the boxes with your tribe's information, but there are some boxes at the bottom where you have to fill out that information. You can just put not applicable as it applies to your organization and sign it.
Great, thank you. Where can we find the fact sheet for Purpose Area 6?
You can find that on the Tribal Community and Justice website. I'm going to go back to the slide that I have with different websites. The DOJ Tribal Justice website, www.justice.gov/tribal. You can find fact sheets for all of the purpose areas there.
Great, thank you. Outside of CTAS, are there any additional funding opportunities that tribes can apply for?
Yes, tribes can apply for many of the same opportunities that other organizations can apply for. So I encourage you to look at government-wide opportunities that are available on grants.gov, as well as on the OJP Funding Resource Center, which is also known as the Grants Resource Guide site. The link to that site is on the screen. It's the last bullet. For DOJ-specific tribal opportunities, I also encourage you to check out justice.gov/tribal. And in addition to that, earlier I mentioned making sure that you sign up for email updates, OVC, DOJ Tribal Justice, and the OJP Grants Resource Guide. You can sign up for individual updates at all of the DOJ program office bureaus, so OVC, BJA. They have programs that aren't tribal specific, but tribes can often apply for them. They are eligible, so I encourage you to take a look at those sites as well.
Great, thank you. If a tribal consortium resolution of 2 tribes is an applicant, can one tribe serve as a fiscal agent, or would the applicant be one tribe on behalf of the entire consortium?
The applicant would be one tribe on behalf of the entire consortium.
Great, thank you. Why do we have to budget every year for the National Indian Nations Conference when the next one is in 2020?
So you don't have to budget every year for the Indian Nations Conference. The Indian Nations Conference is held every other year. It's required for OVC grantees. The first is the new grantee orientation. I mentioned that new grantee orientation, most of the time, is held in conjunction with the Indian Nations Conference. Usually it's held for a day or two before the Indian Nations Conference takes place. OVC requires our grantees to attend the Indian Nations Conference whenever it takes place. So in that case, you would budget for the new grantee orientation, which would also include the Indian Nations Conference. The second year, you'd budget for a mandatory training, which is to be determined. And the third year would be just for you to attend the Indian Nations Conference, because if you already have funding and you've already attended a new grantee orientation, you don't need to attend that again, but we do require you to send representation to the Indian Nations Conference.
Great, thank you. And as it relates to grant funding, if a government shutdown occurs, does it affect the grantees? Would they be on layoff too?
It depends on how your program is run. Generally speaking, your money that you receive in your grant is allocated in whatever year you receive the funding. So you still have access to your funds. You can still run your program. The only concern that you may want to consider is whether or not you'll be able to draw down your funds, because a lot of times when the government shuts down, GPRS, which is the Grant Payment Request System, also shuts down. If your tribe is able to float your any expenses that you have during the shutdown, or if you're able to draw down before the shutdown starts and you can, you have expenses that you'll need to pay out within the allowable 10-day period after drawing down, then you don't need to worry about your program shutting down or having to lay off people. But that's on a case-by-case basis. It depends how your financial systems are set up and your individual situation.
Great, thank you. And a question about the 10-day drawdown that was mentioned earlier. Can we obligate payroll until the end of March as a result of a conference that we are providing? Are we able to draw down?
I don't know the exact answer to that. I recommend that if you are a current grantee, that you reach out to your individual grant manager to talk about the circumstances surrounding your need.
Thank you. And are supportive staff to investigators and prosecutors enough to support the goal of this grant? Supportive staff would come in the form of advocate to victimized child from start through recovery.
Yes, you can still apply for support staff under this program.
Great, thank you. Can you go over again what the page limit is for the program narrative?
The page limit for the program narrative is 10 pages.
Thank you. If we have a follow-up question, can we contact one of you?
Yes, but I recommend that you send your question to the email address on the screen, and if it warrants our response, if the people at the response center aren't able to answer your question, they will forward it to me to answer for you.
Great, thank you. The question about supportive staff to investigators and prosecutors, enough to support the goal of the grant. The supportive staff would come in form of advocate to the victimized child from start through recovery. They missed the answer to that question. Could you answer that again?
Yes, if the person is going to be a victim advocate for children, you can apply under Purpose Area 6. But keep in mind, if the person is only, and I don't say only as in it's not important, but if they are only providing advocacy services and they are not actually doing investigation and prosecution, you can apply under Purpose Area 7. And I encourage you to do that because the amount of awards that we are able to fund under Purpose Area 6 is significantly less than what we can fund under Purpose Area 7. So if you're funding an advocate and they're not performing investigation and prosecution duties, even if their purpose is to serve children, I recommend that you apply under Purpose Area 7.
Great, thank you. Is a paralegal considered support staff for the investigating prosecutor?
It can be considered support staff, yes.
Thank you. If we completed a community needs assessment, strategic plan and logic model in the past, can we use those?
You are welcome to attach them to your application, and we encourage that. Whether or not those documents will satisfy the requirements under a new grant is contingent upon a conversation that you need to have with your individual grant manager. Many times, previously completed documents will satisfy those requirements under a new grant, especially if they were just completed. That determination is made on a case-by-case basis. But we do encourage you to include those documents with your application.
Great. Thank you, Yolanda. Thanks for joining, and I hope you have a great day.